It's a common thing for films to record plenty of retakes or even alternate sequences for scenes in movies. Actors can try to improvise different lines of dialogue, or multiple takes may be needed for a shot or scene to be done just right to a director's liking. This leads many films to shoot much more footage than they usually intend to, in trying to transfer a story from script to screen. And a lot of the time, films have to be cut down and edited in order to satisfy certain runtime requirements for studios and producers, which inevitably leads to many deleted scenes that never end up in the final cut. Although a lot of the time, these scenes end up releasing in one form or another, such as extras in physical media releases or through other means such as streaming platforms. Although this is not always the case. And of course, some deleted scenes are never actually seen by audiences. So let's look at 20 lost deleted scenes from famous movies. Rocky. The iconic boxing movie starring Sylvester Stallone is a household name and has been since its release in 1976. Apparently, when the film was being edited due to reasons unknown, many scenes were cut from the film, in Neff's office, simply ending in would give him a shirt that says "Win Rocky Win" on it, that he would later be seen wearing while training throughout the movie. Some of the known scenes that were lost was a bizarre one in which Rocky's girlfriend Adrian. Also, there was a different ending that had also been shot, in which after Rocky and Apollo's fight, fans of the two would carry them out of the ring on their shoulders, with Rocky later going backstage to look for Adrian. And after finding her, they would simply walk off toward the dressing room, ending the movie there. This understandably seemed to be an unsatisfying ending according to Stallone, and so the scenes were reshot with the ending we know now today. Stallone himself has tried to acquire some of these deleted scenes from MGM, although they responded saying that the scenes had been incinerated sometime in the 1980s, so it's unlikely that these scenes will ever be found or seen again. American Beauty. The film American Beauty, released in 1999, follows the life of a man named Lester Burnham, played by Kevin Spacey, who during his midlife crisis ends up having an affair with his daughter's teenage friend. Meanwhile, his daughter Jane falls in love with a neighbor boy named Ricky, and tension between the families ensues, resulting eventually in the death of Lester at the hands of Colonel Fitz, the father of Ricky, because he believed that his son was gay and was having an affair with Lester. However, there was an alternate ending that was allegedly written, shot, and even edited, according to one of the screenwriters for the film, Alan Ball. This alternate ending actually included two variants, one of which consisted of Ricky and Jane being arrested and tried for Lester's murder, and even being found guilty, while another variant found them both innocent. As to why these endings were never used or even released officially, Alan Ball said, quote, "It was just too cynical and too awful." 2001: A Space Odyssey. The 1968 classic from Stanley Kubrick was a revolutionary film showcasing the evolution of the human race from apes to eventually man's exploits in space. From the original cut of the film, apparently there are 17 minutes that were cut, some of which have been described because, for an unknown reason, the deleted scenes were actually found in a salt mine in Kansas. However, these scenes are not likely to be released because of them being cut by Kubrick himself. Some of the lost scenes included were different shots during the Dawn of Man sequence, miscellaneous shots of character Frank Poole jogging, and a scene which explains a line in the film where Bowman addresses Hal about disrupting the radio connection between Poole and their ship, which was only implied in the final cut. A Christmas Story. Most everyone recognizes this classic as probably the most viewed, quoted, and recognizable Christmas movie of all time, garnering much praise and acclaim since its first release in 1983. In case you somehow haven't seen this movie, it centers around the character of Ralph during a Christmas season when he was a child, although it is narrated by himself as an adult. When the film was being edited, however, producers from MGM wanted the movie to be roughly 90 minutes or 2 hours long, so that it could play every 2 hours exactly in theaters. To meet this demand, a couple scenes from the film had to be cut before it could make it into theaters. The two scenes that were cut were fantasy sequences thought up by Ralph. The first included Ralph imagining his teacher talking to his mother about why he needs a Red Ryder BB gun, as well as him using the BB gun to rescue Flash Gordon, whose actor is still in the credits of the official release of the film despite not appearing in it. The other scene was about Ralph imagining himself rescuing Santa Claus. The scripts, sketches, and even costumes exist from these cut sequences, although they are not likely to turn up anytime soon unless MGM decides to release them. The Mummy, 1932. Another famous monster classic from the golden age of monster movies. The Mummy was released back in 1932 by Universal Studios. The plot of the film centered around a mummy that was discovered by archaeologists and brought back to life using magic. In the film, the mummy disguises himself as a human and searches for his long-lost love as he believes that she was reincarnated in the modern era. The love interest of the mummy, named Helen, was shown in many flashback sequences in the original cut of the film, including going all the way back to when she used to know the mummy. However, these scenes were eventually cut and haven't surfaced since its original screenings. Of those past lives, however, it was said that she was eaten alive by lions in one of them, and in another commits suicide. As for why these scenes were cut, it has been stated by Helen's actress, Zita Johann, that it was because they didn't want her role to overshadow Boris Karloff, who was the star of the film playing as the mummy, as he was a very famous actor at the time. Unfortunately, however, these scenes are likely lost for good and will not be coming out with any new home media releases, as Universal stated that they did not have any copies of the original cut, nor any of the deleted scenes. The Breakfast Club. The 1985 film about high school students who meet in detention and subsequently become good friends has become a cult classic and is beloved by many fans around the world. However, not a lot of people know that there was allegedly an hour of footage that was cut from the initial release of the film, as stated by director John Hughes in an interview. Because of this cut, only one copy of the film exists with the entire 2.5-hour run, and that copy was in the possession of the late John Hughes. However, the film was screened one time where the certain scenes have been summarized by the magazine Premiere were able to view the screening. One of these such scenes was said to be improvised, involving the character of Allison, who locked herself in a room and listened to and sung the song My Life to herself, which allegedly moved many of the cast members to tears. There were also extra detention scenes in which Allison would dream about what each of the students were actually like in a sort of dreamlike sequence, along with other fantasy scenes later on in the movie, such as Carl the janitor imagining where the kids would end up in 10 years. Even apparently showing that future Bender had committed suicide and that Brian dies of a heart attack at just age 35. Some of these scenes have been included in the latest Criterion Blu-ray release of the film, although the full original cut has never resurfaced. The Dark Knight Trilogy. Directed by Christopher Nolan, this Batman series is known for having long but also great movies. Christopher himself, being a very admired director today, has a somewhat interesting take on deleted scenes, and even said in interviews that he doesn't like making and shooting extra material that won't make it into the final film. This is because he thinks that deleted scenes can actually detract from the mystique of the film. However, despite this, many lost deleted scenes exist from the Dark Knight trilogy that are known about. Such as in Batman Begins, Bruce disguises himself as a homeless man in order to take pictures of Judge Faden. There was also a cut scene of Batman standing on a rooftop in the classic gargoyle-type pose. In The Dark Knight, the opening bank heist scene was extended and apparently showed the Joker bribing a woman on the street. There was also a scene in which the Joker escaped from Bruce's penthouse, as well as more backstory on Harvey Dent that was cut. For The Dark Knight Rises, although not many specific details from deleted scenes are known, there was a rumor that there was once a 4-hour cut of the film that was made. Although this has never been confirmed and none of these scenes have ever made it to the public. Metropolis. A 1927 classic silent film directed by Fritz Lang completely changed the landscape of filmmaking, especially during that time. However, even with it being as groundbreaking as it was at the time, and it still being considered one of the greatest movies ever made, there are still scenes missing from the original cut of the film. This is because after its initial screenings in Berlin, the film was cut down from 2.5 hours to an hour and a half, and in some cases only an hour, which led of course to many relevant scenes concerning the plot of the film being left out, which made an already surreal movie that much harder to understand for audience members. However, in 2008, it was discovered that the original cut of the film did exist still, and was being screened in Argentina. After this was discovered, the film was immediately transferred over and copied. However, at this point, the film had already been severely damaged. But due to possibly the greatest effort for film restoration in our time, the film was put back together and officially released on DVD in 2010. Although even with the extreme restoration efforts, 2 scenes from the film were still cut because the film was too heavily damaged during these sections. Some also even believe that there's even more footage that once existed out there that was even longer than the original Berlin screening cut, which may have lasted to over 3.5 hours, although this has never been confirmed. King Kong, 1933. One of the first of its kind, King Kong was one of the most influential monster movies of its time, released all the way back in 1933. However, the cut that was screened and is known around the world today does not contain all the scenes that were filmed. Some of these deleted sequences are known about, although all of them are lost, with no known copies of them existing today. One of the most infamous scenes that was cut was the spider pit sequence, wherein which several characters are attacked by giant spiders in a seemingly random scene. The scene was apparently so scary at the time that in some of the test screenings for the original cut, audience members would leave and occasionally even faint. The scene was cut from subsequent screenings, although allegedly not because of how much it terrified audiences, but because of the fact that it didn't fit well into the story and really only derailed the plot. Other scenes that were cut involved the Brontosaurus violently killing 3 sailors, as well as multiple shots that didn't look realistic enough or were deemed too similar to scenes from other films. The Hills Have Eyes. The well-known horror exploitation film from Wes Craven, made back in 1977, is known for being not only scary but also very violent and disturbing, as it follows a family named the Carters as they are stalked and eventually attacked by savage cannibals in the Nevada desert, where they find themselves stranded. While this movie is already grotesque as it is, apparently many scenes from the film had to be cut in order to maintain an R rating with the MPAA, as many of the deleted scenes were considered too graphic and violent. While none of these scenes have ever seen the light of day, some of the scenes that were toned down are known, such as the scene in which Jupiter beats Fred to death, or also the scene in which Jupiter eats Bob's arm, which was apparently much more graphic in the original version, even showing Jupiter shove one of Bob's own fingers into his eye. Wizard of Oz. In 1939, the Wonderful Wizard of Oz novel would receive a movie adaptation that would go on to be one of, if not the most well-known and watched movie of all time. However, despite it being a classic movie made for families and children to enjoy over the decades, many people don't know that the production of the film was actually quite hellish, with many accidents happening on set with potentially life-threatening injuries almost taking place, and even multiple cast and crew member changes along the way, going through 5 directors before the film was finished. Due to this, there was a lot of lost footage, some that isn't even accounted for. What is known, however, is that there were several versions of most of the characters, even having some scenes filmed with them, such as the original Tin Man, who, due to complications with an allergic reaction to the aluminum on his costume and makeup, was rushed to hospital, which halted production, and caused the changes of many aspects of production, including the actor who would play Tin Man. There was also a scene where Dorothy and Tin Man get attacked by bees, with screenshots as well as the script for this scene existing. The only surviving deleted scene from the film, however, is merely an extended scene of Scarecrow dancing to If Only I Had a Brain. All of the other lost footage is most likely gone for good. Double Indemnity. The 1944 film noir, directed by Billy Wilder, is a film credited as being one of the forefathers of noir cinema and popularizing the genre. The movie centers around an insurance salesman who gets involved in a murder plot with a woman who is trying to get rid of her husband. According to Wilder, the movie had 2 different endings that were scripted, which both ended up being filmed with only one making it into the final film. This lost ending involved the main character, Neff, being executed in a gas chamber. This ending was shown to test audiences who actually surprisingly liked the ending. However, Wilder felt that this ending was unnecessary and opted for the first idea, simply ending in Neff's office. A Hays Code associate that viewed the original ending called it, quote, unduly gruesome. And since it was shown to the few test audience members, it has never resurfaced and is thought to have been even lost for good. Although stills from this lost ending, as well as the script for the scenes, do still exist. The Land Before Time. In 1988, this animated feature film created by George Lucas and Don Bluth was released. However, not before extensive editing and cutting of many scenes. The movie itself centered around a dinosaur named Littlefoot, who, after the death of his mother, has to try to get to a mythical location called the Great Valley. Many scenes from the film were cut over the course of development. At its completion, the film was about 82 minutes long, but even then, after cuts had already been made, the film was further cut down to just 69 minutes, mere weeks before the movie would premiere. These missing 13 minutes of the film have been described by Steven Spielberg, who was an executive producer on the project, as too disturbing for children. Many storyboards from these cut scenes exist. Some of these include an extended fight scene between the villain Sharptooth and Littlefoot's mother, an extended sequence of Sharptooth's death, including holding the frame of his body sinking slowly into a lake, and also an alternate ending, which is still lost and still unknown to this day, with the plot of it only being speculated on based on the cells and storyboards that have surfaced online. Suicide Squad. The 2016 superhero film is about a group of villains being forced to work together and save the world, including well-known DC characters such as Harley Quinn, the Joker, Deadshot, and even a cameo from Batman. Like many other films in the DC cinematic universe, the film was heavily cut down and edited from its initial runtime, which was said to be about 2 hours and 45 minutes, which would end up being cut down to just 2 hours and 10 minutes before its final release. One of the strangest cuts was the backstory of Killer Croc, as it was cut in its entirety. A lot of scenes with the Joker were also cut, including one where him and Harley get into a fight, and even him appearing in the climactic battle, getting into a severe helicopter crash which would leave his face permanently scarred. Apparently also, in order to make the character of Captain Boomerang more sympathetic, scenes of him acting in a sexist and racist manner were cut entirely from the film. And while the footage has not yet been released, it's actually possible that there will one day be a director's cut of the film, like there was with Justice League, after the tremendous positive feedback it received. Joker. The 2019 reimagining of the classic character was praised by mainstream audiences, even yielding the actor who played Joker, Joaquin Phoenix, the Oscar for Best Actor that year. The film centered around the origin story of the Joker and as a character study for Arthur Fleck, a failed comedian who starts to slowly unwind into madness. It's not like most movies though, based on comic book characters. It's made for adults and is rated R. But even then, being as dark as the subject matter was, there was still a scene that was even too much for this film. Not much is known about the scene other than it was mentioned by the director, Todd Phillips, and was simply referred to as the bathtub scene. He said in an interview, quote, "There were 2 or 3 other scenes that we shot. One that is amazing in a bathtub, but I don't think we can actually include it in an R-rated movie." Unfortunately, not much else is known about the scene, although it is theorized that, like many other scenes in the film, such as the infamous scene where Arthur gets into his fridge, it may have been something that was ad-libbed or improvised by Joaquin. But unless the scene is included in some upcoming release, we may never have the answer. House of a Thousand Corpses. Directed by Rob Zombie in 2003, House of a Thousand Corpses is a cult classic beloved by many horror fans. It was originally supposed to be released in 2000, however Universal Studios chose not to because they were afraid it would receive an NC-17 rating. Until finally in 2003, Lionsgate did release the film, although demanding many scenes be cut in the process. Some scenes would even be filmed with two different versions in case they were deemed too graphic. A character with multiple scenes called Miss Bunny was completely cut from the film even, including apparently a scene in which she used dead animals to perform a puppet show. There was also an alternate ending that never made it into the final film, other than the fact that the character played by Chris Hardwick would be eaten alive by zombies, even with the screenshot of it existing, although it is very graphic. However, there was also a screening of the full uncut version of the film on March 13th, 2003 in Argentina. Although this was the one time that it was shown, and even Rob Zombie himself said about the deleted content, quote, "I don't think it will ever be released, because I don't think anyone knows where any of it is, truthfully. Even when they put together the DVD, which was 13 years ago, we couldn't find anything because they had shot 200 interviews in the time since the shoot. We had behind the scenes stuff, makeup tests, all these different things, and nobody could find it. It was all lost. That's why I think whatever exists is all that's ever going to exist." The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. One of, if not the most acclaimed spaghetti westerns of all time, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966 is already a very long movie as we know it today. However, most people have seen this movie in the edited English release, but the film was actually made in Italian and was simply dubbed over in English, with many scenes being cut entirely when the film was re-edited. The most famous deleted scene from the film showed the character Tuco extorting money, while Clint Eastwood's character Blondie would steal the money back with the help of a prostitute. There only exist 2 short clips that were ever found, as well as a few stills from this sequence. Other deleted scenes include one where Blondie is stranded in a desert and slides into the skeleton of an animal that is buried in the sand, as well as a scene where Tuco would try to use a cannon, but it would end up misfiring and break when he fired it. However, the most interesting deleted scene for many is the Angel Eyes scene, in which the antagonist of the film explains why he is hunting after the missing gold in the first place, which is the driving plot behind the film. However, no footage from this scene exists at all. Jacob's Ladder. The notorious horror film from 1990, Jacob's Ladder revolves around a Vietnam War veteran named Jacob Singer, who experiences bouts of hallucinations and flashbacks, and slowly starts to lose himself in the madness. The film is well known for how disturbing and raw it is, with many people claiming it's one of the most disturbing depictions of PTSD in film. In fact, during test screenings, the film received overwhelming negative feedback because it was simply too much and just too disturbing for mainstream audiences to handle. And because of this, about 20 minutes of footage was subsequently cut. Of the 11 cut scenes, 3 were released on DVD, while the remaining 8 are still lost, although many details about them have been documented. Of these disturbing sequences, a few stick out, such as a scene where Jacob finds a man's decapitated head in a cabinet, as well as another scene where he burns down an army base. And one of these scenes is so graphic and so disturbing, YouTube probably wouldn't like it if I mentioned it, so I'll just leave it at that. If you're really curious, it's pretty easy to find online. Thin Red Line. With an ensemble cast of famous actors at the time, Thin Red Line released to great audience reception in 1998. The film served as an adaptation of the novel of the same name, centering around a private in World War II who ends up being a part of an American assault in Guadalcanal. The movie was directed by Terrence Malick and starred Sean Penn, Adrian Brody, George Clooney, Woody Harrelson, and a lot more. However, when post-production for the movie was finished, many actors realized that a lot of their scenes had been cut, as there were so many known actors playing featured roles. And the movie isn't short at all. The final cut is actually 3 hours long. However, it's estimated still that about 2 hours of footage was cut, which is still lost to this day. When editing this final version of the film, Malick himself was forced to cut the movie down to 3 hours or less. This led to many actors having reduced screen time and even very well-known actors having their roles cut entirely, such as appearances from Gary Oldman and Viggo Mortensen, as well as 3 hours of narration done by Billy Bob Thornton, which was also cut. Some deleted scenes did end up releasing with the Criterion Collection Blu-ray release of the film, including extended scenes with Adrian Brody and George Clooney. However, most of the footage still has not seen the light of day, and is either held by Malick, who did not want to release any more of the footage, or by Fox, who distributed the film. The Black Cauldron. Back in 1985, a Disney film by the name of The Black Cauldron was released to select test audiences, which, due to negative reactions from these initial screenings, was heavily altered before its official release. The film itself is about a young man named Taran who dreams of becoming a knight, and in his quest seeks to find the Black Cauldron and stop it from falling into the hands of the Horned King, who will use it to create an undead army. Despite being a Disney film and an animated cartoon, the project was originally meant to be more so targeted towards older audiences. However, later on that was changed and many scenes were cut, with some having to be reanimated completely, with 12 minutes of footage being cut. Audience members were even able to point out where these scenes were cut, as it was late into production when they decided to redo those scenes. And so these cuts are rather jarring, featuring a lot of stills as well as animation of lower quality. Some of these changes are known, with some animation cells making their way online. And the violence contained in these scenes are quite shocking, especially when you consider that this was a Disney production. In one of these cut sequences, a character allegedly had their throat cut with a sword. And an even more violent scene involved two men dissolving and melting down to skeletons in a very graphic way, with blood and even skin appearing to melt off their bones. The only known copy of the uncut version of the film is said to be in the hands of producer Joe Hale, and most likely is in the secure archives of the Walt Disney Company. And sadly, this version of the film will likely never be released.